Hello everybody and welcome back to the Creature Flesh workshop and part 5 of our making a silicone mask inspired by The Last of Us. So in our previous videos we've completed our sculpt, we've also completed our mold, so if you haven't had a chance to catch that, please go back and check those videos out. But today is the day where we open up our mold and see if it actually worked, see if it captured all of that hard work that we did in our sculpt. And I'll be honest with you, I'm pretty nervous. But if the mold has worked out, we can open it up, we can get it cleaned out, and then we can start pouring our masks in silicone. So let's get the mold open. So I've got a couple of tools that I'm going to use to get this opened up. Just some simple flathead screwdrivers, and I've got some of our mixing sticks as well that we are going to jam into these areas of the mask that are going to start opening up. We're going to very carefully tap those in just to hold that open as we pry it open. Now I'm expecting the back to come off first, just because it's a slightly simpler sculpt on the back there, and there's a lot more intricacy on the front of the mask, which I think is going to make it grab onto the mold a little bit more. So I think that's going to be a little bit trickier to get out. But let's see if we can start getting it opened up. So you can already see along here, it's actually coming open quite nicely. So that suggests that the two pieces of mold wool are not stuck together, which is a good sign. Okay, I'm just going to start tapping some of these into the lines here that have started opening up. I'm just going to spray a little bit of isopropyl alcohol into those cracks to try and loosen up some of that mold release. That was a nice little pop. Okay, that's our back piece off, and you can see that it's kind of ripped off some of this clay here, but not too much has actually come off inside the mold, which I'm pretty happy about, because cleaning up a mold can be incredibly time consuming. But one thing I do want to make sure that I do is to keep all of these bits of clay that makes up our mask. And the reason for that is once it's all out, we can weigh the clay, and then we can work out exactly how much silicone we need to fill up this mask. I'm going to just lightly spray around the edge in the hope of loosening up some of this clay from its mold. Okay, so I've set up a little pipe here, a metal pipe that I'm going to use to thread into my core here, and that's going to hopefully allow me to push the front of that mold off. Okay, so I think that's released from the core. Now I just need to carefully pry it away from the sculpt. That was close, I nearly dropped it. Okay, so we've successfully demolded our sculpt, and it looks like we haven't got any major damage, at least. Nothing's broken off yet. I need to get all of this out of our mold now, but for now, I'm feeling quietly confident that I think it's going to work out okay. Just going to check the core out as well, just to see. So there doesn't seem to be any damage to the core either, hasn't cracked anywhere, hasn't warped. So that's a relief, and now we need to get that clay out of our mold. Okay, I'll be honest, that came out a lot easier than I thought it was going to. I don't want to speak too soon because we could still find that there's imperfections and maybe even broken bits underneath the clay, but I'm pretty happy and pretty confident that it's going to be okay. I can already see from looking at the exposed bits here that it's captured the detail of our sculpt really, really well. Can't really see too many air bubbles as well, which is always a really good sign. So I'm just going to be gently pulling off this clay with some wooden tools, and I've also got this little stippling brush here that I can spray on some alcohol and just to get some of those very small bits that are stuck onto our mold. So let's start getting some of this clay off. I'm also starting with the back because it seems much easier, and then we can take our time with the front piece. Oh, that's fine. Making sure that I'm reserving that clay to weigh it later. And it seems like that our universal mold release really did a good job. And it's sometimes easy when you're doing something like this to forget about what it's going to be like to actually demold it. But when you do everything correctly and you use the right materials, it actually makes it a much more easy and pleasurable thing to do. You can still see the detail on our sculpture. Okay, so these are the bits that are going to be trickier to get off. They're the more detailed areas. It's that kind of fungus bit on the top of the head. I can see a few microscopic air bubbles just up the top here, but I don't think that's going to impact our final piece too much. I'm also looking at the line around the edge, which is going to be our seam line, and it's looking nice and straight. There's a few air bubbles here and there on the edge, but I don't think again that's going to impact it. That seam line has to be patched in our final piece anyway. We're going to have to cut that away and patch it over with some more silicone, so it's not going to make too much of a difference. Just going to loosen it up a little bit with some of our alcohol. As I'm working on this kind of fungus bit at the top here, I can already see that the front piece of that mask is going to be a lot more difficult than this piece. And the great thing about the shell shock that I used for that kind of initial coat, it's really, really tough. So I can kind of scrape out a little bit with these wooden tools. I wouldn't do it with a metal tool, but I haven't got to worry too much about any of that detail getting compromised. Okay, so that's all of the major bits of clay that have been taken out. We've now got some of these little bits that have stuck all into the kind of cracks and the more detailed areas. So we just need to get those out. I'm just going to spray in some isopropyl alcohol. And we're going to get our little chip brush and just go in there with that. So that's our mold nicely cleaned up. We've got all of our clay out, and you can see it really has captured a lot of that detail nicely. Now that was relatively straightforward. Even some of these bits up here didn't take too much encouragement to come out. But one other thing that I need to do is clean up this bottom piece where some of this fiberglass is still exposed. So I want to cut that off. Now we've got it off of our core. But now we've got to do this bit. Now we've got our mould nicely cleaned out, I can see that it's, for the most part, captured all the detail of our sculpt. There's a few air bubbles in there, but nothing that can't be patched after we've cast it in silicone, so I'm not too worried about that. But the next thing we need to do is add some bleeder holes into our mould. And these bleeder holes are going to allow air to escape when we pour in our silicone into the top of the mould. Because what we don't want is big voids of air building up inside the mould, because that means when we demold it, there's going to be big giant bits of the mold that need to be patched, and that's going to be an absolute nightmare. So I'm going to position these bleeder holes at high points in the mask where air is most likely to build up. And when we're pouring it, it also allows us to see how full that mold is getting. So I'm going to be using a very small drill bit to do this, because we don't want too much of the silicone leaking out and not being able to plug those holes easily. So I'm going to start with the chin. And then a couple on the ears. Next we're going to do the brow. Now if you can remember back to the sculpt, there's quite a lot of detail around the eyes with the fungus coming out, so I'm just going to put some bleeder holes in those little tips to make sure they get filled with silicone. And then we've got the main fungus on top, and that's quite likely to get air pockets stuck in those bits, so we're going to just drill up through those as well. I think I'm going to put one on the lip as well, and then also one on the tip of the nose. I should definitely be wearing a mask. And there's also some high points on the shoulder where we sculpted that fungus coming out of the neck. Now we can always add more bleeder holes later, but I think there's enough in there for now. But if we do find there's particularly big pockets of air in certain areas of the mask, we can always just punch a bleeder hole in there. But for now, the only thing left to do is to drill our pour hole. Now I'm going to use a hole saw to put our hole for our pour spout in the top. Now that pour spout is going to sit as much at the top as we can possibly get it. I'm going to have to slightly offset that pour spout because of the detail on the top of the head, but it's not going to affect too much. There's a nice area here that I can put it so that it won't take too much patching. Okay, that went through nicely. We've got our little pour spout hole here. So now we need to attach our actual pour spout, which is just a little piece of PVC pipe. Now I'm going to super glue it on first, and then I'm going to use some epoxy putty to actually secure it. Now I'm going to use a little bit of this epoxy putty just to secure it around the edge of that spout. And this is the same putty that we used to create our clay sculpting tools. Okay, that's looking good. I can give this a little bit of extra strength by fiberglassing over it, but for now I'm going to see how it gets on. If it ends up coming off while we're pouring, I'll just fiberglass it next time. So we've just got to wait for this to set. So I've marked out all of our bleeder holes on the outside of our mold. So when it comes to pouring our silicone in, I know exactly where to look when I'm looking out for silicone coming out of those bleeder holes. Now I've put the mould back together because now I want to drill 4 final holes, and they're going to go through the mould and into the head form that's underneath. And the reason for that is I want to prevent leakage as much as I can. So if I can bolt the mould to the head form, I'm able to close that little gap that can appear at the bottom between the two and hopefully prevent leakage from the bottom. So that's our mould all finished. We've got all of our bolt holes all the way around the edge of our mould, and we've also drilled the holes into the core, our positive head form that's inside, so it should be nice and secure. We've also got our pour spout just on the top there, and that's set up nicely. You can see there, nice and solid. And we've also got all of our bleeder holes all mapped out on there as well. So let's bolt it together and see how it looks. Well, that's the end of part 5. Please join us again next time, where we'll be doing the last step in the process before we can finally pour some silicone into our mould. And as always, thanks for joining us. We'll see you on the next one.